battle lines are drawn, and once again, somebody's saying, wait, be patient. If they knew how long it would be before all people could truly hear freedom ring, I wonder which end of that moral arc would they choose. I wonder if more would have walked in his shoes. This is what revolution looks like. You gotta get in and then stay in this fight. You've got to find a way to get in the way. Speak out every day. Freedom riders, or let the battle line.
Good morning, everyone. We want to thank you for joining us this morning at the Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute. My name is Lynn Whitfield, and I am your executive director. And I am so glad to welcome again our enlighteners at the Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute. Attorney Daryl D. Jones out of Maryland, and of course, the incomparable Dr. Barbara Arnwine. And it is such a pleasure to have them. And today we have a special guest with us, and that is Attorney Ashley Lee, who is the chair-elect of the National Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division, will be taking office and swearing in July of 2022. And we are so glad to have her because she's also the chair of the Young Lawyers Division's Election Protection Committee. And this, of course, unfortunately, and fortunately for me, is our last session of semester 2 of the Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute. We hope you have enjoyed it. We hope that you have shared it with everyone you know. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Daryl Jones and Barbara Arnwine to get us started, because we've got a lot of information for you today.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And you know, Barbara and I are so excited to have Ashley Lee joining us today for this Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute as we talk about lawyers and engineering transformative change in our democracy. And you know, without question, lawyers have been the backbone of change when it's come to change that's needed in this democracy. No less true words were spoken as exist today, as it shows the need for judges, as for lawyers to get in there and just really work to be certain that the Constitution assures that every American has their rights protected throughout this country. And you know, Barbara and I are so excited to have with us Ashley Lee, who has worked arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder with the Transformative Justice Coalition in our efforts all across this country. She's doing mighty things right now with the National Bar Association. We know that she will continue to do that. She certainly is one of the up and coming. They say up and coming. We just say stars. She is one of the star lawyers that's out there right now. And Barbara, are you with us? And as Barbara is coming on board, you know, Ashley.
Oh, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize
there you are.
Off. All righty. Good morning, everyone. And Daryl, thank you so much, and Lynn, for getting us started. It is our pleasure to, as Daryl said, to host this session. This is, of course, our last session for the second semester. Can't wait for the third semester. Third semester is going to rock. It's going to all be about how we get out there and get the vote on, how we help all our friends, our neighbors, our communities get the vote on. So we are so excited to wrap this second semester. And today's topic is also, of course, dear to our hearts, because all of us watched Ketanji Brown Jackson become the first U.S. Supreme Court Justice. And that, of course, was one of the heights of African-American lawyer achievement. But she wasn't just any old judge. She was like these judges, and she was like these lawyers, these legal advocates that we're going to talk about, who fought all the way through the many centuries to bring us into not only racial equality, but the fight that still has to be fought, that people are trying to take backwards, but also they fought so very, very hard for voting rights. And voting rights is our theme, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, because democracy has no breath without the beauty of the vote.
And you know, Barbara, it could not be more timely to speak about lawyering and voting rights than right now, because we know that in the state of Florida, they're in the middle of a battle right now where they are questioning Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act, and that's being litigated and going up to the courts, and the lawyers are just in the middle of it all. And at the core of that is the battle for voting rights, primarily for Black and brown people, and types of legislation that are being introduced to try to suppress that legislation. So, you know, with that, you know, Ashley, would you like to have an opening word?
Absolutely. Well, it is truly a pleasure to be with my friends, my family, you know, the queen of election protection, Dr. Barbara Arnwine, Free the Vote, Daryl Jones. You know, I remember, you know, in the summer, you know, just, you know, being behind the scenes as part of TJC, you know, watching these two, you know, fight for us, fight for voting rights, get us to where we are today. The fight's certainly not over, and I'm certainly excited to be here to talk about, you know, how lawyers are engineering change and what we can do to push the needle forward. So excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Ashley. You are one of the many bright lights of the upcoming legal profession. You are setting the trail. You are blazing the trail. People are so proud of you, and no one's more prouder than we are. So why don't we move to the next slide? Because this is lawyers engineering transformative change in our democracy. You know, the oddity of the U.S. democracy was that it was founded on the rule of law, that fundamental principle, and it was founded as a constitutional legal system that was radical in the 1770s when we were founded in 70, when we fought our revolution and when our government was established. And of course, it took years for us to get a proper constitution, but by the late 1700s, we had one. And however, no matter how much we talked about human dignity, how much we talked about we the people, no matter how much we talked about inalienable rights in the Declaration, the reality was that slavery and Native American land theft and genocide was upon us. And it contradicted from the very beginning the fundamental legal pillars of this society. So the fact that we're still battling this battle is understandable, because we started off building the wrong foundation in so many respects. So I wanted to, you know, start there. And Daryl, did you want to say anything else about this founding?
No, Barbara, I think that you've laid a perfect foundation for about where we're getting ready to launch to next. We can go into our next slide.
Yes.
And the fight to ensure racial equality under the law has been a hallmark of the African-American advocates and lawyers since the colonial era. And, you know, it's been just that entire fight that Barbara initially has laid out, that from our initial existence, our initial placement here, it has been nothing but a fight. And it's been nothing other than trying to have, at a minimum, the human right to exist recognized and respected. That's what this whole battle stems from and begins with. Barbara, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, it's interesting. I was just reading a really great article that my friend John Skilton wrote, and he was looking at the whole notion of original intent in the U.S. Constitution, and he, of course, had to go there. He had to talk about Dred Scott and how, you know, the quote notion of original intent was used to interpret the Constitution instead of looking at the broader parameters of human dignity. And he talked about how it took, of course, as we all know, the Civil War to get us to where we need to go. But believe it or not, folks, as early as the 1700s, Black advocates were out there. We're going to talk about how that happened. Think about it. The first law school, the first teaching of law in America didn't even happen until the 1774. The U.S., of course, being a new nation, a colonial nation, it had all of these needs. And we are in 1774, we don't even have independence. We don't even have a law. We don't even have a constitution. But law schools were already being founded. And interestingly, Littlefield Law School was the first one that we know of that was founded. It was founded in the 1830s, but also William and Mary has been fighting for its status as the first law school, because it was the first law school that was affiliated with a major institution, and that wasn't until 1777. Moving on.
Barbara, but before we leave there, one of the interesting things with regards to Litchfield Law School was that one of the founding members there was a gentleman by the name of Tapping Reeve. Tapping Reeve. Remember that name, folks, Tapping Reeve. And what was really, I think, fascinating is that Tapping Reeve actually started Litchfield out of his home. And he would have people come there to his home, and he would teach them law and learn law. And it expanded and became popular. And he actually had to put an addition onto his home for people that were coming and that wanted to learn. Out of that Litchfield Law School, 2 U.S. vice presidents came. Both Aaron Burr and John C. Calhoun. Both came out of that Litchfield Law School. But remember that name, Tapping Reeve. I'm sorry to interrupt there, Barbara. I know you want to go into Lucy Terry Prince.
Whoa, I got to talk about some Lucy Terry Prince. Lucy Terry Prince says the entire story of African Americans being in the United States. She was stolen from Africa, as were all of our ancestors, and brought here and enslaved. But she was a woman of considerable intelligence, and she met an incredible African American man who fought for her and bought her freedom and married her. And she became educated. She was educated by her, quote, masters, as an experiment. And she became known early for her poetry. If you look her up, you're going to probably find out about her poetry. But what you won't know is that she ended up in a legal battle with some white neighbors who basically didn't want a Black family living next to them. So they started harassing them and started encroaching on their property, started making their lives miserable. And she said, I'm not going to have it. So she sued them. In that time, because by the time she has the lawsuit, it is in the very early years of our Constitution. And so 1803, the Constitution isn't even, a full 3 decades old. And at that point, remember, the Constitution only establishes the Supreme Court at that point, and the lower courts didn't exist. So the Supreme Court justices rode circuit to hear cases that were pending that raised, significant issues at the federal level. And she was contending, of course, that this was a violation of her rights. And she had a argument that she did. Not only did she argue cases before the Supreme Court of her state, but she also, in Vermont, but she also argued before the Supreme Court. How did that happen? It's not like she filed the case and people said there was going to be a Black woman arguing the case. Before the first Black woman, first Black person, we believe, to argue before these United States Supreme Court formally, but it was that she had a white lawyer who was her formal lawyer on papers. And Daryl and Lynn and Ashley, the record says that when he was called upon to argue the case, she stood up. He sat down and she proceeded to do the entire argument before the US Supreme Court justice. And that when she finished, the justice was blown away, having never seen such a thing in his life, a Black woman advocate. And he granted her motion. She won her case, and the neighbors were compelled to stop the harassment, and they quieted her title. But what was really amazing is that he wrote about it. And he said that when he saw her and heard her argument, that it was better than any Vermont lawyer he had ever heard from. That's how bad, how amazing our foreparents are. When we look at how we have used the law throughout the centuries to vindicate and argue for our rights.
Without formal training.
Yeah.
In this case.
But she had enough training. I mean, she didn't have to go to Litchfield. She didn't have to go to William and Mary. She studied that law. She went and watched those lawyers in the courts. She learned how to do it. She was African genius. I mean, not even, quote, one generation out of slavery. She was African genius because this is doing slavery. She's a free woman making this argument because a Black man had the wherewithal to buy her freedom.
The other piece that's also interesting that comes out of the Louis Terry Prince era, Barbara, is that, although she had this tense relationship with her neighbor, what ended up happening at some point, if I recall correctly, is that the neighbor got a clan of people together to go and attack her property and destroy her home and burn down their wealth. They were prosecuted, right, as they should be. But as the system would show, and was probably somewhat consistent today, once they were caught and put in jail, the owner of the property, her adjoining property, actually bailed them out, and they never ended up going to jail. And the guy that was the owner of the property, he himself was never brought up on any charges or anything. And it really is also an example of ways in which Black wealth was being stripped away and not put back in place. So, the concept of Louis Terry Prince having that wherewithal, that drive to go forward and push forward with her case is really, really monumental in my estimation. Going on to our next slide. Oh, Barbara, oh boy, Mom Bet.
Yeah. I love me some Mom Bet. She is, she actually freed, she actually sued for her freedom. Now, let me be very clear, people. We could have done a whole seminar on this subject alone because there are numerous cases in the United States during the late 1700s and early 1800s of Blacks suing for freedom and suing for their wages, for the stolen, labor. And it's just one of the stories that we're highlighting. And the reason why we're highlighting Mom Beth and not the incredible stories from all over the country is because she not only sued her freedom for her freedom, she also got some recompense, some reparations for her labor. But beyond that, she became known in the New England area as the go-to advocate. And she actually ended up being like a lawyer. She argued several cases for Black folks from all over New England who would come to her and seek her assistance. So in that regard, again, she is like on the vanguard of the early African-American advocates, not quote lawyers, but they are advocates in the law, in the courts, arguing for African Americans, not only for their freedom, but for equality against the injustices. And as Daryl noted, the reality of the law is it only goes so far. And we know that throughout history here in the US, that we have, unequal, incomplete justice. And we'll talk more about that as we keep going through these slides. Anybody else?
You know me, Barbara, I got to throw something in on this.
All
let me
right.
tell you what I find really interesting. Mom Bet actually changed her name after she was successful to Elizabeth Freeman, right?
Right.
Because she's a free person. So she
Right,
changed
she's
her
a
name
free
to Elizabeth
person. Right.
Free person. That's right. But I remember I kept telling folks, and I kept asking you to remember the name Tapping Reeve, Tapping Reeve, Tapping Reeve from Litchfield. Guess who represented Mom Bet? Tapping Reeve. That's the person that represented her in that case, folks. So that's why I say it's really interesting. The other part that I find fascinating with Mom Bet, she was illiterate, could not read, couldn't read and write. So this is the person that is bringing these cases and bringing these actions and remembering what she has heard being said about the law. And let me tell you, to talk about strength and integrity, the white woman in whose house she worked was going after this young Black enslaved girl that worked there as well. And Mom Bet decided that she was going to protect this young girl. And so she stood in front of the girl and would not let the housemaiden get to her. And what the house lady did, the white woman of the home did is she had a slashing type tool that she was going to hit on this girl with. Mom Bet stayed in front of her. The woman ended up hitting Mom Bet in the arm and slashing her arm open. It was a deep wound. It did not heal properly. Mom Bet refused to put any type of bandage on that wound. And the question folks was asking was why? Because when folks came there for dinner, the missus's friends, and asked, "Oh, what's wrong with your arm?" She would respond, "Ask Mrs." Folks, that's the type of person that Mom Bet Elizabeth Freeman was. Let's go to our next slide. I'm sorry.
No, I love it, but doesn't it strike you, everyone, that I think that what we got to remember is, Mom Beth and Lucy Terry Prince are standing up in an incredible era, because in 1801 we have we have the North Carolina in court in North Carolina versus Mann. The Supreme Court of North Carolina had just ruled that a Black woman who was mutilated, in the same kind of vicious torture to compel them to work, a Black woman who had been rented out to another quote slave owner, and who then handled her and tortured her and maimed her and caused serious injury to her body, such that the master who had loaned her out did not feel that he could get his wealth back of use of her because this man had beat her so savagely. And he sued the other slave owner for this brutality. And North Carolina Supreme Court said that that suit was dismissed because a slave was totally subject to any whim of their master. And even a rental master had complete and total control over the slave, including the right to maim and kill if they did not follow their orders. So that's what I want you to understand, is this is all happening in that context, that kind of that kind of fighting for freedom. And we know that Harriet Tubman was also injured by a master, quote, angry at another African slave who threw a stone, a huge brick at him and hit her in the head. And that's how she ended up suffering all her life and had to have brain surgery in her 80s, if I'm correct, in order to live just the next number of years. But go ahead. The next slide is Daryl, go ahead.
Macon Bolin Allen, 1816 to 1894, Barbara. He was admitted to the Maine bar. All this Northeast stuff. Maine bar in 1844, and he passed Massachusetts bar at 45. First black law firm with Robert Morris. Became a justice of the peace in 1847, was an elected judge in South Carolina in 1873. That's Macon Bolin. We have so many prominent black attorneys that have just paved the way. Macon Bowling Allen is just one of those examples. Next slide.
Charlotte
Ray, Barbara.
Oh, yes. And Ashley, do you want to take Charlotte Ray?
Yeah, so, Ms. Barbara, we stand on Charlotte Ray's shoulders as, the first Black woman to practice law in the United States, a graduate of a historically Black college, Howard University School of Law in DC, one of the first women to argue in front of the DC Supreme Court. I mean, I'm telling you, this woman was, she was Black girl magic. She, truly is a trailblazer for Black women. I'm sure Justice, all of our Black women lawyers, look to her. And we stand on her shoulders. I mean, she even joined the women's suffrage movement. I know we're going to talk about voting rights later on in the session, but without that suffrage movement and without participation of women like Charlotte E. Ray, we certainly wouldn't, I don't think, Ms. Barbara and Daryl, be sitting here today having these types of discussions.
And, I should have also mentioned after the slide for Mom Beth that, Charlotte Ray and Macon Bowling Allen, they are coming in a very special time in history, because think about this, Charlotte Ray is, coming, she's born during the period of Dred Scott ruling. She will live, as with Macon Bowling Allen, through the Reconstruction era. And there's one thing, next time when we do our, we're going to go even deeper into Reconstruction, because one of the things that people need to understand is of those 2,000 roughly African American elected officials during the period of Reconstruction, from the end of the Civil War to the period of roughly 1901, when George White is thrown out of Congress, in essence, because they make his district just impossible to win in, and so much voter suppression. But during that time of those 2,000 African-American elected officials, a lot of them were lawyers, and they all were lawmakers, and they all had, tremendous, amazing impact on our society. We do not even know, most of us, the history of the Free Bank, the Freedmen's Bank, which was legislation that the 16 Black members of Congress constantly pushed, and that was, the 2 senators and the 14 congresspersons, all Black men, of course, and we don't know about their battle for the Klan Act. That Ku Klux Klan Act was pushed by Black members of Congress, and it became a cause célèbre throughout the United States. Without the Freedmen's Bank being established, there would be no story really of Frederick Douglass in Washington, D.C., because that's what brought him to D.C., was to become the chair of the Freedmen's Bank. There are so many, amazing stories that people need to know, to understand, but I just want to say one name: Robert Brown Elliott. He had a law practice that was incredible in South Carolina. He originally was in Boston, and then he came to South Carolina. He was a newspaper man, but he had his own law practice, and his partner said that he was extraordinary, that he knew the political condition of every nook and corner of the state. He knew every important person in every town, village, or town. He knew the history of the entire state as it related to politics. He served in a number of offices. He was in the Constitutional Convention, the state legislature. He was in the U.S. House of Representatives starting in 1870. And he also served as Speaker of the House in the South Carolina legislature from 1874 to 76. He gave two speeches that we need to resurrect that became cause célèbre speeches that people talked about, that were published in newspapers and while he was in Congress. And one was on the Ku Klux Klan Act. And he really pointed out about the shame and the violence and the barbaric behavior that they were engaging in and hurting and killing Blacks. And he gave just an amazing speech. But of course, once again, because of voter suppression, he was driven out of office and was unable to win the seat for the Senate that he ran for. And I just want to say this really quickly, Daryl and everyone, is that one of the problems for Black lawyers post-Reconstruction was earning a living. Mm-hmm. And he found it so hard to earn a living because he had been one of these politicians. There was so much stigma about the Black politicians from the Reconstruction era that he ends up having to leave South Carolina and go to New Orleans to take up a position for the Treasury Department. And there he will die. Everybody listen to me. He will die penniless. That is our story. Because we fought for justice, we were often penalized. Moving on to the next slide.
You know, Howard University, the School of Law there is just, I mean, when you talk about an institution that has produced just a number of great attorneys, Howard University is right there. And, it started out as the Howard Law Department and then progressed from there into the Howard University School of Law. The founding dean was John Mercer Langston. And, he was an abolitionist, a really avid civil rights person. And what some people miss and I find really fascinating, that, he comes from a family of educated people that were really all pioneers. His uncle was who? Langston Hughes.
That's right.
It's really interesting to see all of this, sort of interconnected. He's believed actually to be the first Black ever elected to public office in America. And that in the person of John Mercer Langston. So, and he's also the first president of Virginia State University. So he was really just a phenomenal person. And again, Howard University, HU, there you go, a little shout out. Would you like to add anything, Ashley or Barbara?
Wow. Everybody knows that Howard University will start off as a very small law school. In fact, called the law department originally. It will take it a number of years to become the law school, but it will graduate eventually more Black lawyers than any other institution during its heyday. And I want people to understand that these lawyers, as we're going to talk about later, will develop a special brand because when they were founded, one of their mottos was it wasn't just a school to study law. In its actual constitution and its write-up in its charter, it said that it was there. It was created to make sure that lawyers would represent African Americans in their quest for racial equality. So there was no doubt in its actual formation what it was designed to do, which was different than any other law school up until that point in history. So it is an amazing institution just when you look at its foundational pillars.
And Ms. Barbara, for the young folks that are listening, it's important to note that you couldn't go to UGA, right? Or
Right.
other law schools, during this time. Like there were only certain law schools that Black women and men could go to, and Howard was one of those. And it was producing, as you mentioned, stellar lawyers that were really changing the course of history when education was being denied to so many Black people.
Amen. And thank you for talking. Now we got to talk about Frederick Douglass for a minute. Only because Frederick Douglass is so central, not only to this entire era, because even though he was not a lawyer, not legally trained, he gave more speeches interpreting the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence than probably anybody. That was the beauty of his abolitionism, of his entire fight, was that he spoke eloquently about the need for the constitutional amendments, that we would eventually get during the Reconstruction Congress. You would have, of course, the amazing 13th Amendment with its flaws, the 14th Amendment with its flaws, and the 15th Amendment with its, basically the failure of the courts to enact it. But he was, to enforce it. But he was amazing because I'll tell you guys, the first time I went to the Department of Justice to meet with the Attorney General of the United States, and I sat in the conference room, I immediately, for the Civil Rights Department, I immediately saw a big old portrait they have of Frederick Douglass. And it's because he was appointed one of the first Black U.S. Marshal ever in the United States. And he became, which made him a part of what would become the fledgling new U.S. Department of Justice that was created in, if I'm correct, in 1869. And he becomes, just a stellar example to everybody, not only of an orator, but he also becomes a model for Black lawyers. So I just want people to know that in the background of all of these institutions, of all of these advocates, there is this incredible truth-speaking Frederick Douglass. Next slide. Daryl.
Oh yeah, Charles Hamilton Houston, my goodness. We talk about, seriously, when we talk about someone who has had just a profound impact on the legal profession, you're talking about a person like Charles Hamilton Houston. Just sort of remember that he's born in the era that Plessy versus Ferguson is decided. Decided that separate but equal facilities was appropriate. And Charles Hamilton Houston has this quote, and I'm going to give you the entire quote because I think it so encompasses what the legal profession should be about and those that are involved in the civil rights movement. And he says that a social engineer is a highly skilled, perceptive, sensitive lawyer who understands the Constitution of the United States and knows how to explore its uses in the solving of problems of local communities and in bettering conditions of the underprivileged citizens. In essence, the lawyer is trained as a social engineer to use those skills that he's been trained to create a better society, particularly for those that are underprivileged and underserved. And that's the calling of the civil rights attorney. I can't think of somebody that more embodies that than Charles Hamilton Houston. And the thing, Barbara, that I like to touch on, because you know how I like to connect things all up, with Charles Hamilton Houston, when he was born and going through the whole Plessy versus Ferguson, we got to remember that it was going through that era where the Supreme Court decided Plessy versus Ferguson, and the South as a whole had already done their slavery by another name, if you will, and separating everything out and not allowing Blacks to have anything. Plessy versus Ferguson served as an underscoring, as something to those that had already kept everyone Black from those that are white, as sort of the court saying, you all were right down South. You don't have to have everyone together. Put them in a separate place, and you can call whatever you want to call it equal if you want, but you can separate, and it's okay now by law. That's what Charles Hamilton Houston came in and was fighting. And when he talks about the social engineering and the fighting for the rights of the underprivileged, I believe that's what he's speaking to, Barbara.
Absolutely, because by the time he's born, like you said, 1895 is the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. And it is deep because by then the Supreme Court has invalidated the Civil Rights Act, has invalidated the Ku Klux, some provisions of the Ku Klux Klan Act. The court, has, eviscerated, parts in the use of the 14th Amendment. I mean, this is just horrible. In the Colfax case, I mean, this is just terrible era of Supreme Court jurisprudence where the Supreme Court is driving the death knell of Reconstruction and setting up a segregated society. Why don't we skip the next slide and go on to the NAACP slide? Because people just don't know about these victories. In this, everybody knows about Brown versus Board. But remember, the NAACP is founded in 1905, 1906, it takes off. And people, when the Niagara movement happens and brings together, this new era, we're beyond abolitionism now. We're into a new era where there has been decades of cowardice by white Northerners. And there is now a fervent need because the oppression of Blacks is so severe that to create something new. And the one thing I love about our Black lawyers and our Black foreparents is their understanding of the importance of institutions, not only Howard Law School, but the importance of advocacy institutions. And so there's how you end up with the Niagara movement, where there's this convening, and out of the Niagara movement comes the NAACP. The NAACP would adopt a fervent agenda for racial equality, and that they would fight in the courts, and would early on, 10 years basically after its founding, win the case of Gwynn versus United States, which struck down a discriminatory Oklahoma voting law. Basically, it struck down the portions of that law that it was a literacy test. And what it did was it basically provided that if your grandparents had voted, that you didn't have to pass the literacy test. Of course, the only people who were voting who met that criteria were whites, and Blacks who met that criteria were ignored. And the Supreme Court struck it down as being racially discriminatory and unequal protection under the 14th Amendment. It was really one of the first times that the Supreme Court used the 14th Amendment to strike down a voting rights law, and the 15th Amendment to strike down a voting rights law. So it was really significant. And then you had a case that when I was growing up, and in my early years as a lawyer, I heard about all the time, Smith versus Allwright. And that was the entire fight against white primaries. And this was a decision in 1944. Think about it, folks. This is early in the Supreme Court jurisprudence. There is no Brennan, there is no, Blackmun. This is this is not the Warren Court, but they struck down this outright white primary system because it was so obviously discriminatory under the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment. And then, of course, there's Harper versus Virginia, was struck down voting fees and poll taxes, even though by the time Harper versus Virginia is argued in 1966, if I'm right, we already had the 24th Amendment, but you just had this, inability of these states to apply, to actually comply with the law. And they were charging fees and taxes in Virginia for Blacks to vote. So this is the just some of these early amazing victories that that you can attribute to the institution of the NAACP.
And what's interesting, Barbara, is that if we were to take that and to bring it forward, right, today, that 1944 All Right case or the Harper versus Virginia case, folks would say, well, none of that's being applied now. Well, whoa, put a pin in that for just a second. Because what's happening down in Florida when the legislature comes back and says, in order for you to be able to vote, you've got to be, as a previously convicted person, that you've got to pay all of your fines and fees to vote. That's a poll tax. So we're revisiting a lot of those issues and the all-white primaries and watching the redistricting lines being drawn to water down the power of the Black vote. A lot of those things we're now revisiting. Would you not say that, Ashley?
Absolutely. I just read an article about some of the redistricting that's happening, that's effectively, taking power away from Black voters today here in 2022. So, it's important that we learn from our history, because if we're not careful, it can be cyclical and can come back around. And that's why this institute is so important, because so many people, we're familiar with these cases because we've gone to law school, we've studied them in depth. But for our
law school, I never heard about Gwen.
And some of it, that's very true. Some of us learned about it and some of us didn't. It might have been a footnote in a textbook, or it might have been omitted totally. Yeah, so I think this institute is really shedding light so that we can identify these issues and bring them up and engage organizations like the National Bar Association, which I know we'll talk about shortly, to help fight these areas.
Right, Ashley, and talk about the National Bar.
Yeah, so the National Bar Association, which we're all a part of here on the call, was founded in 1925 because Black lawyers could not be a part of the American Bar Association. We were denied access to this organization. So you know what, when we're denied something, we'll just form our own, right? And so we had stellar founders such as Charles Hamilton Houston, who we just talked about, and we saw his brilliance as Daryl was reading the quotes. Him and his colleagues, Charles P. Howard, James Morris, Joe Brown, George Woodson, Gertrude Rush, they came together and formed an organization that is still in existence, still producing Black lawyers that are affecting change. In fact, I became acquainted with Miss Barbara and Daryl through the National Bar Association. I remember participating in the conference and listening and hearing Miss Barbara talk about these very issues. And I was like, wow, I need to get involved. And so this is an organization that will approach its 100th year anniversary in a few short years, but has made certainly an impact on civil rights and voting rights throughout its tenure.
Wow. And let's go to probably the best known Black lawyer in history, and that is Thurgood Marshall. Daryl?
What else can be said about Thurgood Marshall? We've talked about Howard University School of Law. That's the school where he attended. He was a Lincoln University undergraduate school that he attended there. He just champions, and one of his best known cases was the Brown versus the Board of Education. And very interestingly, his mentor was Charles Hamilton Houston. And it was no surprise that, it was some of the principles that Charles Hamilton Houston used in arguing Plessy versus Ferguson type cases that is then taken and applied by Thurgood Marshall to argue the Brown versus the Board of Education. So it's just a phenomenal time in history. There's a story out there, Barbara, and I don't verify the truth of this story, but they say that Thurgood Marshall initially wanted to go to the University of Maryland School of Law, but the University of Maryland School of Law was desegregated. He qualified for all intents and purposes. They didn't know what to do, so they paid him to go to Howard University Law School. So he was one of the recipients of a free education, through that aspect. But just a powerful advocate, our first Black Supreme Court justice. And I can remember one of his quotes, Barbara, that just sort of stayed with me when he was retiring from the court. And he was much older, he was frail. And they asked him, Justice Marshall, why are you retiring? What's happening? And his quote was just as simple as everything else he's ever said, very plain, very, very clear, very direct. He said, I'm old and I'm falling apart. That's why I'm getting off the court. He used to get under, these are those little stories. He used to get under the skin of Chief Justice Rehnquist. And Rehnquist really, just didn't know how to handle Thurgood Marshall. So Thurgood used to refer to Chief Rehnquist as Chiefy baby. And Rehnquist would go crazy because he wasn't, using all of the proper protocol. Hey, Chiefy baby. Right? But Thurgood Marshall was just a phenomenal justice and much recorded, as Barbara's indicated, was most recorded Black attorney in African-American history. Barbara or Ashley?
Yes, Ashley's next, and Ashley's going to talk about the amazing Constance Baker.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, so Constance Baker, another phenomenal Black woman jurist, licensed to practice in 1946. And what's so profound about her is that she worked very closely with Thurgood Marshall while they were working with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, creating strategy to really help improve Black lives during this time that, there was lots of inequities and injustices happening. She made history arguing as the first Black woman before the United States Supreme Court and argued some very landmark cases. And she won those cases. So, she was a force to be reckoned with, one that we are better for because she existed and because she served the bar.
Absolutely. And wait a minute, everybody. If you're saying, wait a minute, that name sounds so familiar to me, that's because Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson said that she was what? Her inspiration, her North Star. And I just want to point out that she served on the federal courts for over 40 years, was even the chief judge of her court, but was never promoted to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. There's a whole lot to be said about what happened during that era, that she was never promoted to the appellate courts. So we got a lot to talk about. Next slide, Wiley Brampton. All I want to say is that you should take his name down, look him up. He argued the case of Cooper versus Aaron before the United States. He saw so many justices in the criminal justice field, and he helped desegregation was his trademark, and he argued these cases to desegregate the public schools, especially in Little Rock. He headed the Voter Education Project in 1962. Next slide. Because these two are come together, because this list you see here of African-American lawyers, you look at this list. If you got a camera, take a picture of this photo, because these are the unsung heroes and sheroes of the 1950s through 1965. Look at them, from Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia. These are the Black lawyers who stood on the front lines of these battles against segregation, the front line of these battles fighting for voting rights, the front lines. These are the names that you don't even know. I haven't met half of them, but I had the pleasure of meeting a number of them. Amazing lawyers, amazing. But also, next slide, as we know from the next slide, that a lot of the Black lawyers would suffer, not only financial difficulties being civil rights lawyers because nobody was funding them. That's why the creation of the NAACP was so important, because it became a funding conduit for Black lawyers to do civil rights law. And that's what it did in its early years, was it funded all, Black lawyers in the Deep South handling these cases. And Fred Gray, whoa, come on, Ashley.
Yeah, so Fred Gray, a graduate of my law school alma mater, Case Western Reserve University School of Law, phenomenal lawyer who is still practicing. Miss Barbara, Fred Gray was just part of the TJC Black Voters Matter lawsuit that was last year. So he is still pounding the pavement in his 90s, making the world a better place, this country a place. He has served as a lawyer for Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. I mean, just a phenomenal jurist. We mentioned the National Bar Association. He was president for a number of years. So just an incredible man who is continuing to fight for our rights.
Daryl?
Oh yeah, and let's go on to our next slide. Lawyers who engineered change in Mississippi. Just a number of the attorneys that have been involved with the push for civil rights. When you get into those deep southern states and you talk about pushing for civil rights, folks, it's not a cakewalk. It's not something that's easy to do. And it's not simply the threats with regards to going out and taking the cases and trying to win. You're trying to change a system that has been implemented and is resistant to any change. And it's not just in the courtroom, it's in the roads as well, in the streets as well. So, we certainly give a nod to a lot of these lawyers that are out there, that are in the streets, that are in the courtrooms, fighting for civil rights in the Deep South. Barbara, anything you want to add before we go to our next slide?
No, the Lawyers Committee's first office, you'll hear, was founded in Mississippi. Mississippi was the heart of the resistance to racial justice. It still is. And I can, that's another presentation. I just note Harvey, Carol Rose, John Britton, amazing lawyers who are still, leading this fight today. Let's go on to the organizational slide, Ashley.
Yeah, so these are just a few of the organizations that have continued to fight. I mean, there are a number of organizations that are missing. I would argue that the Transformative Justice Coalition should be listed here because we were led by two accomplished lawyers that are continuing to champion civil rights in the courtroom and in the streets. So these are just a few organizations that continue to help us move the ball forward.
And yes. Barbara, the next one is your baby.
Hey, Lawyers Committee.
We got the President Emeritus here. Come on now.
Yes.
All right now. Well, it started in 1963. And by the way, people, President Kennedy just didn't wake up and say it'd be nice to have some lawyers come to the White House. This was because the ABA, the American Bar Association, was resisting every single civil rights law that was being proposed in the 1960s. And it was embarrassing. They opposed every single bill. The 1957 Civil Rights Act, they opposed everything. And they would not stand up and take a position on these governors and others saying that they weren't going to desegregate They weren't going to comply with the 54 civil rights order in Brown versus Ed. And out of that failure, and because at this point, John Lewis and Diane Nash and Jim Lawson and everybody was doing their freedom rides, and Big Duck and what was happening to our beautiful, amazing Fannie Lou Hamer and so many others. This was all going on. And because people were coming to the Justice Department saying, help us, and they didn't have enough lawyers, it made the question, what was going on with the private bar? Why wasn't it standing up? So that's how you end up creating this lawyers committee, even though you got an LDF, an ACLU, all these other groups, you end up creating the lawyers committee because the private bar wasn't doing their job. And that is, and the lawyers committee is created to bring the private bar pro bono into the fight for justice. And note that Kennedy had the gumption and the foresight to say that when they told him they were going to have this, that they were recommending this meeting of the 250 lawyers, you notice 6 didn't show. I'll tell you that story one other day. But 25%, he insisted, had to be Black lawyers because he wanted to make sure that the lawyers committee represented the principles of integration and African-American leadership in the bar that he believed in. Next slide. And this is just—
Barbara, that American Bar Association that you said that was opposed to the civil rights legislation being introduced, is that the same American Bar Association that said that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson was well qualified, there was high status to be a judge? Am I right?
It was more than that. Not only is it the same bar association, because here's what happens quickly, and I'll try to do this quickly because folks, we are running over, but please bear with us. We're getting through this. This is a great presentation, but you should know that that the founding of the lawyers committee, the same meeting of the 244 lawyers, out of that meeting came something else. It wasn't just the creation of the lawyers committee, but out of that meeting becomes the first section of individual rights and responsibilities of the ABA. That section will go on to fight for voting rights, fight for civil rights. It will become the force within the ABA of change. And even when 1988, the ABA was still fighting. We had to fight with them, like, let me say, toughly, over their opposition to the renewal of the updating and amendments of the Fair Housing Act. That just shows you how persistent the resistance within the ABA was. But think about it, like you said, Daryl. Judge Ann Claire Williams a Black woman, amazing judge. If you never heard of her, write her name down, Judge Ann Claire Williams. She will go ahead and will be the chair of the federal judiciary section of the ABA and will testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on behalf of the well-qualified rating of the ABA for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And these are just the past leaders of the lawyers committee. And you notice all white until Bill Robinson in the 1980s. And then comes one Barbara Arnwine at the end of the 1980s. And then comes Kristen Clark, who's now the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the Justice Department. So all those cases that you're liking where they're suing folks and doing good work, that's her work. And it's wonderful to see that. Now, if we could go on to the past leaders of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, all I want to just tell you quickly, Daryl, and I'll leave it to you next, is that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has been there. It broke off from the NAACP because of all kinds of battles over legal strategy. and over the role of lawyers within the NAACP proper. And so it broke off and created its own entity so that it could be governed only according to what the legal needs were at that time. And you saw, the original, some of the amazing, original leaders, from Julius Chambers to Jack Greenberg to Elaine Jones to Theodore Shaw to John Payton to Sherlyn Ifill, and now Janae Nelson. She just took over as the new president of the NAACP. Daryl, next slide.
Next slide takes us to our social engineers from 1965 through present. Just really a lot of phenomenal lawyers that are doing just great work throughout the country, from Bill Coleman to Dennis Archer, who was a judge, and I think he was a mayor, if I'm not mistaken, in Michigan.
Detroit,
in Detroit, right, for a period of time, and Aljanita Scott Davis. Everyone knows the so renowned Vernon Jordan and his and the history that he had, particularly with the Clinton administration, Anita Earls, and James Ferguson, which brought us up to more.
Yes.
Which brought us up to some more social engineers, Barbara.
Yes, more, like Judge Jean Thibodeau, one of the lawyers who was fighting on the front lines for voting rights in Louisiana, along with other lawyers in that region. That he worked with the Mississippi lawyers and the Alabama lawyers. Amazing. He's an amazing man, still pushing the envelope now. Ernest Morial, Mark Morial's dad, who actually litigated cases for voting rights in Louisiana. Judge Burnett Johnson, who I had the joy of representing in a recent fight, some 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, when she was denied the right to become the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, and we sued them to enforce our consent decree that we had gotten many years before. When I say we, the Lawyers Committee at that point had gotten many years before, and she has been she was a brilliant Chief Justice. We won that case. H.T. Smith, oh my God, Lynn could talk about H.T. Smith forever, so can I. Just an amazing national bar leader, but also an amazing litigator and fighter for voting rights. Departed from us, but definitely one of the shining bright lights of the progressive wing of the legal profession, W. Haywood Burns. Other social engineers and change agents, Damon Keith, oh my goodness. He, along with Judge Jones, just did amazing work on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. You have Representative John Conyers, who was one of the Young Turks, one of the Blacks who were in that room in 1963 when the Lawyers Committee was founded, but went on to become a brilliant congressman and had a distinguished career and helped to found, believe it or not, the Transformative Justice Coalition. Judge Ann Claire Williams, who I just talked about, but in addition to her service on the ABA, you should know that she is the reason why Equal Justice Works exist. All of those law interns, all of those fellows around the country, the thousands and thousands and thousands of fellows, are because as a sitting judge, when she had a case before her and there was a remainder fund, instead of giving that fund back to the defendants, she created NAPEAL, which became Equal Justice Works. And Judge, of course, Nathaniel Jones, who fought so hard with Judge Damon Keith. Transformative Justice Coalition.
Well, we are here in the midst of engineers for change. I mean, from innovative methods to turning out the vote, from votercades to voter rallies, to just really putting a fire in this country. We have transformative change agents on this call. Miss Lynn Whitfield, Dr. Arnwine, Daryl Jones. I mean, what more can we say about the Transformative Justice Coalition? We could say a lot. I know we're short on time, but they're really, this organization is really doing some innovative work. to continue to protect our right to vote. And so without them, I don't think the country would be where it is today. We might not even have a Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown being confirmed without the work that this organization did in the midterms a few years ago with the presidential election with turnout. And I know that with the upcoming midterms, they're gearing up to continue to affect change. So just, I'm gonna give a little shout out to Transformative Justice Coalition. I might be a little biased, but this is such a worthy organization for sure.
Well, thank you. And we are in our 7th year of existence, and we intend to keep raising all kinds of good work and in getting good things done, and working alongside some of our amazing colleagues like C.K. Hoffler, a former president of the NBA and one of the leading African-American women trial lawyers in the country, one of the most amazing trial lawyers, period, in the country, male or female or of any race. Gerald Griggs, who has been with us down in Brunswick for the Ahmaud Arbery case. Francis Johnson, go ahead, Daryl.
Well, yeah, Francis Johnson, who's with us everywhere we go, it seems, Barbara, whether we're in Brunswick or wherever we seem to be, Francis and his business partner, Mawuli Davis, are always right there with us. And we appreciate the work that they're doing in the civil rights arena as they're really fighting a good fight in the state of Georgia for justice. And Barbara, how can we not talk about Tanya Clay House? My goodness.
She's everything.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Certainly serving with the National Bar Association and their division of dealing with civil rights. Just an incredible, incredible entity. She is history, and she's making that history, and she's applying what she has learned to, certainly push the ship in the correct direction through this trying times that we're coming through. But there are other change agents as well. Is that correct, Lynn? Let's turn to our next slide. Because we know we have Gary Bledsoe down in Texas. Who else do we have, Barbara?
Oh my goodness, we got Kim Keenan, who has been a tremendous leader of the NBA over the years, Vanita Banks. And I really wanted to put all of them here because of the amazing work that she and Vanita and HT and so many did to build the NBA into election protection mode, and along with C.K. Hoffler and the mighty Ashley Lee, all of these. And Tony West, of course, is interesting because he's a different kind of change agent, because he's out of the corporate sector and has fought for and made sure that the money in the corporate sector and that the corporate conscience was used to promote civil rights, voting rights. That brings us to our last slide, and thank you everybody for staying with us. The role of the African-American lawyer is not over. In fact, it's called upon more than ever. On Monday, everyone, get ready for this. There will be a press conference at which they will celebrate the dropping of all charges against Pamela Moses, who was brought up on charges of election fraud and was basically sentenced by a very biased judge to go to jail and to serve time because she was formerly incarcerated and was blocked from voting at the time that she registered. Yet she had been told by her parole officer, and Daryl, you can correct me, that it was okay for her to go ahead and vote and to register. And during the whole trial, the judge talked about her like a dog. Said that she was a liar, that she was deceptive, had seduced people into helping her to violate the law. All of these negative tropes and stereotypes of Black women he used against her. And Daryl, pick it up. What did we find out?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, what had happened with Pamela Moses was that she went to her probation officer and asked if she could register to vote. The probation officer did the research and came back and indicated that there was no reason that she could not vote. And so with that, Pamela Moses went and registered to vote. And at trial, the probation office decided that, you know, they had never told her that, that she had no authority to do it, that she was doing it on her own. And so what then resulted was the conviction of Pamela Moses. She was going to be sentenced to, I believe it was 6 years, is the time of period that she was going to be facing from this judge who just decided that she was just this lying Black woman. And fortunately, it was the work of some investigative reporting that brought out the information, the Guardian to be specific, that found a note indicating that that the Parole and Probation Department had in fact done an investigation, had in fact written something indicating that they didn't see a reason that she could not register to vote. And but for that research and but for that document, Pamela Moses would be in prison for the next 6 years. So that's what we're looking at, and that's what's...
And it's worse than that, Daryl, because the prosecutor had that memo.
She had to know.
Right. Did not provide it as required as exculpatory evidence for her. They sat on it and hid it. And it was only these reporters that brought it to light. And because of that prosecutorial misconduct, and when that was brought to light before the judge, was her sentence, vacated. And then the prosecutors had, of course, the right to bring a new trial. And what they announced on Friday is that they're not going to. And it's Daryl, it's the same prosecutors that hid the evidence. Where is their punishment?
And interestingly, that district attorney is Amy Wyrick, and they are now investigating Amy Wyrick, Barbara, for other matters where she has done professional misconduct. So that story is not over. And this story with Pamela Moses doesn't end with the dropping of the charges on Monday. Much like we do down in Brunswick, Georgia, in Glenn County, Georgia, when we went after Jackie Johnson, we will be doing the same with Amy Wyrick. We need that investigation. We need to know that the people are being properly represented, properly protected, and not biased in the representation and what's going on here, as we saw in Brunswick, Georgia, in the Ahmaud Arbery case, and as we see here in this Pamela Moses case, Barbara.
Yes, and Ashley, take us, because we are all about 2022. It's all about lawyers showing up and showing out on behalf
Absolutely. And so lawyers can participate in a variety of ways. One, if you're not a litigator, I'm not a litigator per se, but guess what? I can use my fingers and get on Twitter and tweet about things. I can post to my social media, to Instagram, and have a hashtag and raise awareness about these issues, raise awareness to our communities about the new voting rights that have been passed and how they can vote, and remind them of upcoming deadlines. Like Monday is the voter registration deadline for Georgia. These dates are coming up. You can get involved. If you want to litigate, there are opportunities for that. If you want to serve as a hotline volunteer with the election protection organization that was founded by Ms. Barbara, you can do that as well. If you want to get involved with Transformative Justice, you can do that. You can also make donations to Transformative Justice to help them continue making this fight. So I encourage people to go to the website, learn more about these organizations, learn more about Transformative Justice Coalition, get involved. If you're a young lawyer under 40, I'm gonna make a shameless plug, practicing 10 years or less, you can get involved in the National Bar Association Young Lawyers Division. So there's opportunities for you to get involved. Let's protect the right to vote. Let's get involved and get these midterms, protected and have people voting.
And Lynn, Barbara, as we love to say, as Ashley just so eloquently stated, get off the sidewalks and get into the street, whatever your street is. If it's the street of social involvement and social digiting and social all that other stuff, get there. If it's the street of getting out there and getting your march on, go there. But get off that sidewalk, get in the street, and let's make change and let's protect this vote. Len.
Yes, and I want to thank you, all three of you. Of course, again, this was a wonderful, wonderful session. What a way to end. I know we had someone who had their hand up. We do not take questions during this webinar. Please, if you want to email me, you can email it to me at lwhitfield@tjcoalition.org, and we will make sure that we get the answer back to you. Before we end, I just wanted to touch on the subject of Pamela Moses, because we have met Ms. Moses. She has actually come to Brunswick, Georgia with all of her documents to let us know and make us aware of her case. But one of the things that neither Barbara nor Daryl mentioned, which I think is very interesting, is that all of this is believed to have started because Pamela Moses worked against Amy and worked to get her out of office.
We were trying
first.
We could have gone in with a lot more, Lynn.
Right,
We were
but
trying to be respectful of the time. You know, we
yeah,
knew
and
that.
I appreciate that, but I just think that that is important for everyone to know, is that her claim is a retaliation, that the whole
Right.
prosecution was retaliation for her prior work. So to see this end come about is just really amazing. We are so glad that you have all tuned in to the Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute, our second semester, and we are encouraging you. We are not doing this for you to be selfish with this information. Please share this information. We have authorized anyone to use our YouTube replays to share this information with their church members, with their family members, with their children. You know, they're now attacking and saying we cannot teach critical race theory in our schools. Well, you know what? We should be demanding that they teach the whole truth, the truth about what our ancestors did in this country and the moves and the victories that we had, so that our little children won't be feeling depressed and upset because all they hear about the slavery. Let them hear about the victories. Let them hear and let them know that they come from a great group of people, fighters, warriors who have taken on the battle and have overcome many obstacles. Barbara, you want to close this out so we can lead these people on their Saturday morning?
Yes, just thank you, everybody. Again, thank you, Lynn, for putting together this Institute's work. Thank you, Daryl, for being an amazing co-leader. You're just outstanding. Keep on, fighting. And Ashley Lee, we are so honored to have done this session with you. I want to just thank everybody on the committee that has been working with us in the Good Trouble Institute. We got more work to do. I can't wait, like I said, for third semester, and get ready because we're coming. Get ready. It is time for change. Get ready. There is something called the Transformative Justice Coalition, and we will not stop until justice is won. The relay race is what we've been talking about today, that relay race, the baton being passed from one generation to the other, a continuum of justice. That's what we got to fight for. And until we got the just democracy that we deserve, that multiracial just democracy, until we get it, fight on, Black lawyers, fight on. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And I should have mentioned, of course, that none of these Black lawyers could do this work without their clients. And all the amazing clients, the Browns and all the people behind those cases, all our tributes to those amazing clients. And keep on. If you see something wrong, you let us know. If you want to be challenge a bad law or procedure, let us know. We're here to do the work. Thank you so much. Daryl, any closing words?
I believe that does it, Barbara. Have a great weekend, everyone. Be prepared for our next email that you'll receive for our next session of the Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute. You will not want to miss it. And let me tell you, we're going to be focusing on Florida. Y'all got it. Thank you, everybody.
Watch Watch out.
All right, well, I'll get my people ready here in Florida. All right, folks, thank you.
And
Thank you for attending.
And we'll talk to you on Tuesday during our radio show. Be sure to listen to Igniting Change. You can listen to it at barbaraornwine.com. barbaraornwine.com, WOL News, DCnews.com. You listen to our radio show because we're bringing a great show to you, and we do every Tuesday from 12 to 1 Eastern time. Be sure to listen. Thank you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the second semester of the Good Trouble Voting Rights Institute is ended. Thank you.
Thank you.